This episode is for legal aspirants who seek to clear LSAT. LSAT preparation is a very tricky process, especially when premier law schools in India have started accepting LSAT. To answer every question revolving around the preparation process, we have with us Mr. Steve Schwartz. Steve is the founder and host of LSAT Unplugged. It's a YouTube channel and a podcast where he helps a lot of law students with LSAT preparation strategies. In this episode, he's going to answer questions around LSAT preparation. If you like this idea, stay tuned and stay to the very end of this episode. Like, share and subscribe. Drop in a comment for whatever you want to see on this episode, especially on this podcast. I would love to hear from you. Hence, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump right in. Hello, Steve. Welcome to the One Take Show. This is a very exciting moment for me because this session, I believe, is going to open so many doors for Indian law students to explore this wonderful world of LSAT and LSAT preparation. A lot of law schools in India have started now accepting LSAT scores as a legitimate admission criterion, and we have n numbers of law schools across the world, especially in US, which really celebrate LSAT as an examination that can be relied upon. So thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I think this conversation is going to benefit a lot of law students.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's my pleasure to provide any information I can. It is exciting how the LSAT has spread to India as well. And so my resources, I imagine, could be useful to those taking the exam there.
Well, most certainly, yes. Before we get into the conversation, Steve, I would love to know about your journey. I think the fact that LSAT Unplugged is helping so many law students across the world, your journey itself is so unique. And I think learning from your own experience and how you arrived at LSAT Unplugged is essential for this conversation.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share that. So I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005. That's when I studied for and took the LSAT myself. I went from a score in the low 150s to a 175 on test day, top 99th percentile. So the lessons I learned along the way informed my own teaching. And I was simply teaching in New York City where I'm based for a while. But then a few years later, I started a website called the LSAT Blog, where I've written over 1,000 articles on everything LSAT and law school admissions. More recently, I've branched into video. So I have the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel, podcast, Facebook group, Instagram, publishing information multiple times a day. And so that's my journey. It's a lot of fun. I love doing videos. I love teaching classes and recording conversations like this. So thank you.
Well, what exactly is the principle behind law LSAT Unplugged, and what exactly do you want to convey through your venture to law students? Like, what should your potential consumers of the content that you create, or the facilities that you provide, or the knowledge that you disseminate should expect from LSAT Unplugged?
Yeah, sure. So my mission, I suppose, is really to make it as easy and affordable to study for the LSAT as possible. Back when I first started teaching this exam, the main option was these in-person prep courses that were $1,500, a lot of money. But now with the internet reducing the cost of providing information and lower cost boutique options like mine rising up, it's possible to prep cheaper than ever before. And I release 98% of my information for free. Then folks can decide if they want to attend my live classes and Q&As and group coaching as well. And so that's really my mission, to get the information out to as many people as possible. And so it's exciting to me that the LSAT is now in India. There's the LSAT India for undergraduate admissions. And so same material, same exam. I'm happy to reach more students with it.
Perfect. So I'm going to ask you a rather naive question, because I think this is essential for any law student who's exploring this world of LSAT. LSAT is a very reputed test, obviously, and a lot of law schools in India, as you've mentioned, have started accepting the scores. So if someone is to start preparing for LSAT, how do they start from scratch? What exactly is the conceptual understanding that we should have before we approach LSAT as an examination?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of folks, their starting point is taking a full-length diagnostic exam. There are many sample papers published online. The issue is that one isn't likely to do very well on them without any preparation. It's like taking an exam in a foreign language you haven't learned yet. It's simply going to tell you there's a lot to learn. So if you do take a diagnostic, don't take it simply as being reflective of your true potential. Rather, just take it as a moment in time, a benchmark from which you could later measure your progress. Instead, I recommend breaking the exam down bit by bit, section by section. So you have the analytical reasoning, also known as logic games. You have logical reasoning and reading comprehension. So break it down bit by bit, step by step within each category, so you can really learn the foundation in a logical progression.
Mhm. Right, right. And as you mentioned that there are a lot of sections which are involved, I'm going to ask you how exactly should we go about with respect to preparation for each and every section? I hope I understand that this is a rather complex question because obviously there are different strategies for every section that needs to be deployed. But with respect to a general strategy that can be adopted for every section, and is there a specific strategy that that you have probably discovered that is extremely effective while taking the test?
Yes, there certainly is. And so it comes down to what I said, breaking it down to manageable chunks. So you have the 3 sections of content: logic games, logical reasoning, reading comprehension. Within each of those categories, you have certain types of logic games or certain types of logical reasoning questions. In logical reasoning, there's maybe 14 different types, depending on how you count it. So there's a lot of nuance and subtlety that a new student isn't going to necessarily recognize jumping in with no prior exposure. But this is what I do. So I've broken it down for you. I have day by day LSAT study plans showing you exactly what to do every single day over the course of your prep, whether you're taking the exam in 1 month or in 6 months. I lay it out for you. And my courses do the same thing as well. And so those are the details, but you could also create your own plan simply based on what I've laid out for free on the site.
Right, right. A rather specific question with respect to areas such as logical reasoning, or you talk about these areas require a lot of training. What particular strategy with respect to logical reasoning you might have come across which is quite useful for law students? Is there something that we can condition for? Because the common law aptitude test that we have in India for other law schools also has a similar pattern to LSAT, and they also have questions based on logical aptitude or logical reasoning. And for that, we are asked to keep solving the questions which come along, and we need to keep discovering the various questions. So is there any such strategy for logical reasoning? Because I often find that law students, they find themselves in precarious conditions or situations which are really tricky with respect to logical reasoning.
Yes, there certainly is. And I can't
Mhm,
speak to the common law admission test. I know which is
mhm,
popular in India. I haven't looked into that one in depth, but logical reasoning, insofar as it is similar and does apply, what I'll say will then be applicable broadly. So the idea is really engage with the arguments. Most arguments in logical reasoning are informal logic. So you want to take it as if you were having a conversation with somebody in a
mhm.
real world setting. Don't try to diagram everything. Most logical reasoning
Okay.
arguments don't lend themselves to diagramming, meaning that it's simply not going to help you. It's just going to be a summary, but it's not actually going to further your understanding. And so take it like you're having a conversation with somebody. And since these arguments contain gaps, point
Mhm.
out what the gap is, what fundamental flaw or error did they commit, or what underlying assumption did they not bother to explicitly state. So
Okay.
critique it, lay it out, have that back and forth.
Mhm. Right, right. And with respect to the language part of the test, I think language is also something that a lot of law students they struggle with, perhaps because English as a language is uh, at times confusing, or perhaps not the most comfortable of the languages available to the Indian law students. So, at such point where language plays such a huge role in a test like LSAT, do you have any basic preparation strategy for language preparation, or how we can improve our skills which reflect in the objective part of the test with respect to
Yeah,
language? Mhm,
yeah, sure. So if someone is a non-native English speaker, the proficiency isn't as high as it could be, it's going
mhm,
to be harder. It's going to take longer. There's no way around that. So if you were going to allow 4 months, give yourself 6 months, or give yourself even a year if you can. There's a lot of
mhm,
old test forms available, nearly 100 LSAT prep tests, so plenty of material to study from there.
mhm.
And I would suggest keeping a running list of every word that gives you trouble, every word that you don't know.
Right.
Save a running list, review them later. And what makes the LSAT difficult with vocabulary, even for native speakers, is
Mhm,
that a lot of the vocabulary is used in unfamiliar ways. So a word may have 3 different definitions, and they're using a secondary or tertiary definition that you have
mhm.
to get in context. And the only way around this is simply to review more to get better at understanding those terms in context.
Yeah, yeah. Do you also suggest perhaps reading a more like the traditional advice when it comes to improving your language skills is obviously reading more novels, reading more English literature, perhaps watching more English movies, English TV series? Does that help, or is that just a myth?
I think it could help if you have a long enough timeline. So if somebody
Okay.
watching this or listening to this, if they were in high school or they
Mhm,
were a freshman or sophomore in college, but they're not taking the LSAT for another couple of years,
mhm,
then they've got plenty of time to build that foundation, even pre-LSAT content.
mhm.
More proficiency is always going to be good, but if you're taking it in 6 months or 3 months, that time would probably be better spent on the actual LSAT material, since, like I said, there are nearly 100 exams, which means 400 reading comp passages, plenty of information to use with the actual test forms.
Right, right. And finally, I think, do you suggest any resources? I mean, obviously, Law Unplugged is one of the most prominent resources that all the law students, especially our listeners, can really exploit who are interested in LSAT. But apart from your resources, any preliminary availability of resources, perhaps like books, which are really appealing to law students when it comes to preparation? For example, SATs have their own staple book, and other such tests which like a TOEFL or IELTS have their own preparation guides and available. Is there any such book that you might have come across which can be used by law students to have a basic understanding of what this test is going to be?
Yeah, certainly. So the Law School Admission Council, the people who create the LSAT, they put out a couple of sample exams available for free on their website inside your lsac.org account. I know that the LSAT India also has some sample test forms available as PDFs. And then LSAC has a program called Law Hub, LAWHUB, lawhub.lsac.org. Inside your account, you can get over 60 exams available in the digital LSAT format. It's a $99 per year subscription to get them in that software, but that's a good resource as well. I would recommend, aside from, of course, mine, LSAT Unplugged. There's the YouTube channel, the podcast, the Facebook group, Instagram, as well as the LSAT blog website, putting out tons of free information all the time. And I also have many of my own guides, checklists, cheat sheets, and explanations, as well as full video courses for every section of the exam and live online classes, Q&As, group coaching, tons of stuff there. And within all of that, there are some books as well that are digital, so folks can get them anywhere in the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. My last set of questions involve strategization with respect to time. How do you see, how important is it for a law student to strategize time, not just for the preparation of the test, but also foreseeing the timing of the test? How long before should we start preparing? Or how, if we, for example, have different timelines, how do we adapt to them?
Yeah, fantastic question. So there's a couple of phases of prep. One is simply accuracy alone. Then you have pacing with individual timed sections. On the LSAT, the sections are 35 minutes, which is really an unreasonably short amount of time. People would enjoy having double time and still might not have perfect accuracy. So the timing is a big part of it. So as the exam gets closer, you want to move from untimed drilling questions by question stem type to doing individual sections to work on your pacing, especially, for example, logical reasoning, where you have generally increasing order of difficulty as you progress through the section, and then pulling it all together with those full-length timed exams. So each part has a certain stage that you've got to consider distinct, and my study plans build this in too.
And with respect to, for example, if I were to take LSAT this year, the next year, how long before should I start preparing, in your opinion, would be an accurate or appropriate time I should put in for the preparation for LSAT?
I would recommend 5 to 6 months in order to achieve your fullest potential. Some folks will try to do it in only 2 to 3 months, but given the importance of the LSAT in the admissions process and how difficult an exam it is, it's worth taking more time to reach your fullest potential.
Perfect. And my last question to you in this segment is that with COVID-19 and pandemic affecting the admission process, affecting how colleges are now being seen and how the universities are actually approaching this admission process, how do you see any potential change in perhaps the examination format, the test format, or the kind of questions, or is there any such potential change that you might have encountered or you are expecting that the law students who are listening to this conversation should be aware about?
That's a fantastic question. And we actually haven't discussed this today, but there is a massive change that happened, which is the new online LSAT Flex.
Wow.
So they were going to administer the LSAT in person in the digital tablet format as they changed it over last year. They were going to do that this year as well. But due to the pandemic, they had to cancel the March LSAT and the April LSAT from being in person and reschedule them as an online LSAT Flex in May. They've since done similar for the June and July LSATs, and they will do the same for the August LSAT. So now, at least for those taking the LSAT this year, most likely, all tests are going to be online LSAT Flex. So the same question types, logic games, logical reasoning, and reading comprehension, but it's now online, not in person, and it's shorter, only 3 sections, not 5. And they're doing this worldwide. And my prediction is it will continue to be online for the foreseeable future, just because it's too hard to do it in person when different areas can have spikes in cases and such.
Right, right. And with respect to taking the test online, I think it's a different challenge altogether. Do you have any such suggestions for law students how exactly an online medium of taking the test can be different from or in-person test taking process? Or is there something that law students should be aware about when they're approaching the test and they're sitting down to take the test through the virtual medium?
Yeah, it's a big difference, especially for those outside the US, especially in places like India, where the
Hmm.
LSAT was still paper and pencil until now. They never did the digital LSAT tablet overseas outside North America. So
Hmm.
those who might have been preparing for the LSAT in books, on paper, they're going to want to change their approach. They're going to want to get used to doing it on a computer and doing it online. So, like I mentioned, the LSAC has Law Hub, where you can get a couple of exams in the digital format, or you can pay more to get many of them in the digital format. And that's the best
Hmm.
preparation to get used to the software, the different annotation tools like highlighting, underlining, the countdown timer, all of that. And so, yeah, definitely prepare in that way if you can.
Perfect, perfect. I think my last question to you would be a very direct one. I think, do you have any 3, 4, 5 tips that, as bullet headers, should be kept in mind as holy grail to be remembered by every law student with respect to preparation, taking the test, strategization, anything? So those 3, 4, 5 bullet points that every law student should have in the mind when they approach LSAT.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, so the first one is don't place too much importance on diagnostic results. Like I said
Okay.
earlier, they don't reflect your potential, they just represent where you are right now.
Hmm.
Second thing is focus on accuracy before timing. So, a lot of
Okay.
folks will jump into doing full length timed exams and just
Hmm.
keep taking more and measuring them. In reality, slow down, understand them deeply.
Hmm.
Third thing is also review. So don't just get things wrong or get them right and look at your results, measure them, and move on. You've got to slow down and actually take the time to dissect what mistakes you're making and why so that you can avoid making the same mistakes again.
Right.
Fourth thing I'll say is give it the time it deserves. Don't try to
Hmm.
do it all in 2 to 3 months. Give yourself at least 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential and
Hmm.
longer potentially if you're not a native English speaker and want to work on the proficiency a bit more. And the last thing I'll say is your LSAT score doesn't define you. So while the LSAT as a whole is incredibly important, no
Hmm.
one particular test date will make or break you. You can always retake. And at least for admission to law schools in the US, they don't
Hmm.
average multiple scores. They only take the highest LSAT score. So
Yeah.
you can retake without really having a penalty. And so I would suggest doing that if necessary.
Perfect, perfect. Lastly, Steve, I think this conversation was something that was absolutely necessary. A lot of my friends personally have also tried taking LSAT. They have now started looking towards LSAT. One of the leading law schools in India accepts LSAT as a test which really defines your potential for admission process. I think this conversation is going to help and benefit all of them. Before we close off this conversation, do you have any closing remarks for our listeners?
I just want to remind folks to feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm a real
Mhm.
person. I'm happy to help however I can. And I'll do whatever I can to point folks in the right direction.
Well, you heard him, listeners. I think this platform that you've created, LSAT Unplugged, is absolutely a wonderful platform. It's helping out a lot of law students, and the advices that you provide and the kind of content that you generate on various digital media platforms is extremely useful for anyone who's trying to benefit, learn, or perhaps grow with this process and perform better at LSAT examinations. Thank you so much for taking time off your really busy schedule, sitting down with me for this wonderful conversation. I had a wonderful time. I hope you had a good time too.
I did. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve.